Welcome back to Medieval Art. I'm Dr. Bryan Keene, and let's dive right into Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 4. I'm here again with Dave Lewis of Cinema Millennials on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. This week's episode was titled Eldest, and we had many introductions for long-awaited legendary figures such as Tom Bombadil, the Barrow-wights, an Entwife, and a new kindred of the Hobbits, the Stores. So, Dave, let's get right off. Who did we love seeing this week?
I loved Tommy B, especially Rory Kinnear's performance as Tommy B. I thought that we get all of the things that we are familiar with Tom and some of the things that we're not so familiar with his more toned down kind of way, in his more serious way. But I do think, however, some people were very nervous about Tom being this kind of very toned down way. But a lot of people forget that context of Fellowship and how we get a lot of deep lore and textual ruin references from Tom about the world as a whole. I loved his line, "Great deeds are left to the hands they were placed in," which referenced Eru Ilúvatar's you catastrophic plan for the universe. And they're really leaning into that whole kind of Tolkien denied debate about Tom being Eru and all knowing. I really loved that whole kind of scene between Tom and the stranger. It just filled me with so much mirth. What did you think about that, Brian?
Yeah, I loved it. To your point about these references to lore and other intertextual references, I also loved the line that we heard Treebeard say in the Peter Jackson series, but now we're given back to Tom from the book about eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. I mean, that's a lovely line to now be reintroduced to Tom's own speaking. His reference to the Withy Windle, I just kept thinking about that moment on the Brandywine River and this eventual moment in the Barrow Downs, which we also got this week, that we can talk about in a moment. But then also that sort of whistling, humming tune and interaction with Goldberry, and we hear a female voice, and we hear the stranger asking. Those were the kind of subtle, playful moments that I really appreciated because there was a seriousness also to Tom, and I think we are 1,000 years or so before the events that we know in the Third Age, and so it's appropriate in some ways to see the eldest figure in Middle Earth have this sort of gradual character development. So I'm grateful. I think the moment when he speaks to the stranger about confronting both Sauron and the fire, I begin to think again, is that fire then another possible reference to Gandalf and the stranger, or other references to lore I think that you have thoughts about?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think what a lot of people are saying that it is a reference to Gandalf's fight against Sauron and Saruman as well. Trying to have that again, the writers in this or the showrunners in this love a red herring. They absolutely adore it for whatever reason, mystery boxes, whatever you want to call it. They love that. I think it points to more of the two blue wizards and how one of them is good and one of them is evil, and they come together in that kind of way to fight against Sauron in the East. These are things and people, quite frankly, we don't really know too much about. And even Tolkien himself, they might not have the rights to Unfinished Tales, although I feel like they might have a couple dispensations from the Tolkien estate itself from that text. That text talks about the Istari and goes and delves deeper into them and who they are and when they're introduced and the whole backstory about them. And I think while Gandalf is the only one that truly succeeds, we don't really know the full story of Alatar and Palando, as they are named. So I think that is really kind of up in the air still, unfortunately. And I think when you're talking about more mystical parts of this world, we are getting something like the Barrow Downs. I think it's really that's one of my favorite parts of the Lord of the Rings, is the Fellowship of the Ring, is this extra horror element. And I know you really want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add one last point about the wizards in the East, I mean, I think you're right with this estimation, and also, I mean, Gandalf makes a point of having never gone into the East, right? So already that would be another sort of real encroaching on the lore in some ways. But I love this scene that we get in the Barrow Downs. Of course, we're not on the Downs, a flat land. We're in a forest in this episode, but there are some really clever moments where, in order to defeat the Barrow Wights, we now need the swords in their tombs in order to defeat them temporarily. And of course, then we have the scene where Tom finds the swords and gives them to the hobbits, the four hobbits in the Fellowship of the Ring. So I think those are some nice subtle moments that draw us back and forth across the lore, and connect with the Peter Jackson trilogy in these long panoramas and add that sense of darkness that does does creep in and adds to that spirituality. We have on the one side Tom that is seen as a kind of all-knowing, Christ-like or divine, being in the Tolkienian sense, similar to Anatar, as we saw in the previous episodes as well. So I love those tensions where they lean into the religious aspects and where you can see the overt sort of Christian undertones that we know from Tolkien's writing, but it feels really appropriate to the world that we've created. So I loved the scene with the Barrow Wights. That was really exciting for me to see. I thought the way it was executed with Galadriel and sort of bringing about a sense of the company knows that this is a place of evil. She has a foreboding, but they're going forward to get to a Region faster. What other thoughts did you have then about the Barrow Wights and that sort of moment in the middle?
I loved the whole song element of it. Tolkien is so much about songs. There's so many songs in The Lord of the Rings. I don't understand why anybody tries to skip them because there's so much lore within them as well. And I think, this also brings back to the idea of Tolkien's Norse influences as well. Not only his Christian influences, but his Norse and Celtic slash British focus that he has within the lore. When you have these dolmens, you have these Neolithic kind of ideas where people aren't really sure what is buried there. We find archaeological things later on with bracelets, swords, different things like that. We have that, um, backwards looking perspective, while these characters don't have that perspective. Or they do, because you have Elrond's brilliant explanation because of the lore. And I think it's interesting that you're talking about this whole thing about going to a region. I think, again, I know I keep bringing this up, much to a lot of people's probably chagrin, is I still think there is a chance that we could be seeing Sauron's tendrils working behind the scenes, even in season one. You have these characters throughout so far that we have Mordania pleading with Celebrimbor to bring in Halbrand slash Anatar. You have the banners in Eregion looking, and in Rune, looking like the sigil and looking like the eye. And then in this episode, more specifically, you have Camnir suggesting to go into the Barrow Downs despite Galadriel's prophecy and warning not to go there. So there are little hints here and there that there could possibly be a big reveal at the end of the season. And then even to go more into the magical kind of elements that, aren't really always so focused on in Tolkien in a hard sense, but we are seeing the possibility of a combination of Galadriel's powers or Nenya's powers to heal Camnir again in this scene.
I think you're right. I mean, that's I just hope that all of these sort of big picture storylines aren't corrected or retconned later on by some vision in a palantir, and we were witnessing one version or one outcome. I really hope it doesn't go down this route. I know in our sort of final moments, we also had a great moment with the Harfoots and their introduction to the Stores, and I love this sort of moment where we have our first inkling of the Suzat, the Shire. I love the reference to petroglyphs and pictographs this week, both in Tommy B's house and also in the Gund showing us these things. How did you feel about that? And also, let's not forget the Entwives.
Oh yeah. Oh, I love the Entwives. I love the whole situation with that about forgiveness. That was such a beautiful moment. And I think it's a moment that Isildur will be massively impacted on later on when he has a relationship with a certain tree. Try not to go too spoilery for events in the Silmarillion if they have the rights to that, of course, or Unfinished Tales. I think that was really beautiful because you're saying with the Suzat, you're getting a lot of linguistic references, and Tolkien's all about linguistics. The world of Arda and his Legendarium as a whole would not exist without the languages that he developed first. So you have the Entwife using thou and hast to show their elder status. And then you have references to the Shibboleth of Feanor with Adar at the end, using S instead of TH, or vice versa, the thorn kind of pronunciations, which is a clue to a very, very obscure work. And then possibly, because of that, a link to the story of Celeborn in this wide story that we're getting in the Second Age so far.
Well, we have so much more to unpack, and in our next week, we're going to see more of Numenor, also some more with the dwarves. So join us again, Dave. Thank you so much, and let's continue this conversation a little bit more for our YouTube channels. Namarie.
Namarie.